Nice. Yeah, I think we are live.
Yes,
So
we
we'll
are.
start this as soon as we get a few more people. So, oops. So yeah, I think we can start in 10 minutes. So let's just have our social posts spread around so we can tell people that we're live and we already are. Hmm?
Yeah, the first time I saw this one, I was like, that's so cool, so cute.
Yeah, this is actually very fluttery indeed. I wish I had one of these toys. I think you got one,
Yeah,
right?
no, I don't. But I think they should manufacture some vinyl toys you know, with this dash.
I wonder when they'll be shipping some of them, no? They should. It's swag.
I
We
hope
need more
so.
swag. So yeah, I think we can start our live stream now. So hello everyone.
Alrighty.
Welcome to Flutter Engage Extended Philippines. We are live from Philippines and California or Vietnam. So tonight we have three special guests. With us are leaders in Flutter development and some of them are leaders here in the Philippines and one of them is a Googler. Would you believe that?
Oh yeah. Well, this is really an unprecedented event. We got the top minds of the Philippines in the Flutter community, and of course the Googler all the way from California, I assume, to grace us with their knowledge. So lots of stuff that you can learn tonight. That's why we are scheduled at 6 p.m. because we are ready for prime time, baby. Because we have it all.
Right, you are. So I guess we can start announcing our house rules and start the event. So, Joni, can I get back to you?
Sure. Yeah. Before we start, we would like to remind everyone that you may ask questions during the talk. Please use the link. The link. How are we going to display the link?
Let me show the Slido link.
All right.
Let's show it later when
Starting.
we're going
Yes.
to be posting it on the ano. So yeah. So
Um,
between us, we have three speakers. So you can start with our first one.
all right. The first one would be Shi Hao Hong. He's a software engineer at Google with the Flutter team working on the core framework, and his talk would be something about the story of a feature in Flutter. So stay tuned for that one.
Yeah. So for our next speaker, we have Paolo Alcabao. He's the mobile group head at Stratpoint. He's from the Philippines, and he's actually my boss. So his
Oh,
topic will be on finding Flutter and our cross-platform journey. So how we discovered Flutter and how we're going to be working on it from this point on.
yeah, I think that would be interesting as well. And after that, we have Zennon Gosalves. He's a project manager and software developer for ThinkBit Solutions. And his talk would be about GitHub Actions for Flutter workflow, which I think it's quite interesting. I mean, even for me, I mean, I haven't even automated my Flutter workflow yet, but yeah, stay tuned for that as well.
And for the last one, we have our very venerable leader, so Joshua de Guzman.
Nice.
So he's our Flutter Dart and GDE. He's also a lead engineer for Better Financial. So his talk will be on securing your Flutter apps. So security is very much important. So
Yeah.
I think that's going to be very, very good for everyone.
Yeah, usually it's the last thing that you would think about the Flutter apps, but it's quite important, especially nowadays. You have lots of hackers and stuff like that. Anyways, after of all of the talks, we will also be having a panel discussion, and of course, drawing lots for the 30 days of Flutter participants. So, well, let's get excited about it.
So yeah, I think there we go. Now, Shihao, if you may now take the stage. So hello, how are you?
Hi. Good. How are you guys doing?
We're
Good,
doing
good.
great.
That's good. Okay. I'm going to try and share my screen real quick.
Mm,
Did that work?
yeah, it did.
Awesome.
So,
Yep, yep.
Okay.
yeah, see ya. I'm going to stop
All
my
right.
microphone now.
All right. Thank you, guys. As they mentioned before, hey guys, my name is Shihao. I work on the Flutter team for Google. The team is based in the Bay Area, but I'm currently based out of Taiwan. So that's why I'm able to give this talk, even though it's 3 a.m. in California right now. Um, I'm also happy to be able to speak on behalf of Southeast Asia because I grew up in Malaysia and then left for the US and started working on the Flutter team after going to the United States. I've been on the team for about a little over 2 years now, and I've been mostly working on the localizations tool and state restoration recently. But before, let's see, some of the bigger projects were stuff like toggle buttons. Lately, I've been starting to work more on stuff like the menu system, like how we're getting the menu system to work with desktop, as well as working more on the additional features of autocomplete, which is actually which is the main widget I'll be talking about today. Yeah, I already gave this talk during Flutter Engage Southeast Asia. So if you've already heard it, you might want to tune out for 10 to 15 minutes, maybe get a glass of water or get dinner and come back to listen to everyone else after, or you can listen to it again if you are really interested. Okay, so I thought a long time about what I wanted to talk about this event and also for the Southeast Asia event, and I didn't want to talk too much about the particulars of what came out for Flutter 2, and that's because most of the information is already available on the internet. There are a lot of articles already, and there are a lot of videos on all the various features and topics that highlight the feature things that came out in Flutter 2. So I don't want to go too much into that. I also didn't want to get too technical because I wasn't sure how proficient our audience would be on Flutter. So I didn't want to go too much into the implementation details of particular features in our widget library. And if you're interested, the source code is all available on GitHub. There's a lot of sample code on the API docs, and all the design discussions are available on the GitHub issues and also on our website. There are a lot of design docs on there. So then what I decided I wanted to talk about was kind of the process of how our team starts on working on different issues and how we scope out work and prioritize on the team. So from that, the hope of the talk is basically like, you could basically that it could help us help you. One of the cool things about working on open source is that we try to be as open as possible, even with things like design, with our code reviews, like everything we do is all open. Like all the work I do is generally all on GitHub. And yeah, this talk will also kind of assume that everyone has a basic understanding of how to use Flutter. And if you don't, it's totally fine. Make it a question for the Q&A session afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the autocomplete widget. And when we first started, basically, they all started with an event in 2019 called Flutter Interact. And I had the privilege to attend this event at the end of 2019. So that was about a year and 4 or 5 months ago. It was basically our event to showcase what we can do with Flutter at the time, and how we can bring great UI experiences across the different platforms that we support. I spent most of my time talking to attendees at the event. Most of them seem to be designers or engineers. And so I showed them example apps built with Flutter, share to them about what I've been working on, and try to answer any questions as best I can, or bring them to someone who is able to better answer their questions. So I happened to run into someone named Hillel Karen, and he's a Google developer expert for Flutter as well. And he co-founded an app called Invoice Ninja. Invoice Ninja is an invoicing app that is basically targeted for freelancers and businesses, and they built their client web app using Flutter. And when I ran into him, basically he mentioned to me that he had trouble finding a good out-of-the-box solution for autocomplete. And so you might ask, what is autocomplete? And basically, autocomplete is a normal text input enhanced by a panel of suggested options. So essentially, when you start typing into your text field, it will start basically providing suggestions for, what answers your user might, suggesting answers that your user might want to select. Currently, it's a widget for Flutter developers to select readily available options out of a list. Users would start typing into the text field, and then basically they would be able to click or tap on an option, and it will just fill in the text field with the selected option. This is a common functionality in many forums, and it was not explicitly supported in Flutter until now. For example, Hillel at the time, he was using a third-party package. I think he said it was called Typeahead, and it lacked functionality for web and desktop, particularly around keyboard navigation. So the first thing that we did was we filed an issue about it on GitHub. If you'd like to hear a more detailed description of our prioritization process, you can go on GitHub and take a look at our wiki. But basically, some of the more important aspects of our prioritization process is we look at the severity of the issue. For example, if there's a bug that's breaking the build, or blocking a key customer, that tends to be the highest priority, or some kind of regression. Another metric we use after that is basically how many thumbs ups there are on the GitHub issue itself. So for example, for autocomplete, after filing the issue, we noticed it received a lot of attention in a short amount of time. So I think I remember in like 2-3 weeks, we got 30, 40 thumbs up. So we knew that a lot of users were really interested in this feature. So Flutter's design process. So one of the first steps we took to implementing a more complex feature, one of the first steps we do take on Flutter is we create a design document for more complex features. So a quick summary of what design documents are. Basically, when any Flutter contributor wants to share their thought process on possible paths moving forward with a feature, or maybe a breaking change and like a migration guide, this is a means to get feedback from the community. So anyone who is interested in creating, fixing, or updating a complex feature in the framework is welcome to write a design document or comment or share feedback on existing design documents. The cool thing about the work we do at Flutter is that anyone can actively engage in this process. And this is basically the way that we continue to incorporate feedback from Hillel, as well as other members of the Flutter team and the community when we worked on autocomplete. In the case of autocomplete, Justin, who's my teammate, took the lead with working on this feature. So he had a ton of input on autocomplete's design document. He's basically our resident expert in the Flutter text editing system, and that makes him like the perfect person to work on the autocomplete widget. So some of the key design discussions we had focused on extensibility, flexibility, and accessibility. So what that means is, in terms of extensibility, we wanted to make sure that the widget can be, basically extended upon by users, so that you can create your own UI or like implement your own design for the autocomplete. So basically, we made something, a version of autocomplete called raw autocomplete, and we also had a material style autocomplete widget. The raw version of this is in the widget library, and that basically allows users to extend on the autocomplete widget functionality with their own custom UI. And on the other hand, we also have a autocomplete material widget, which is pretty much the out-of-the-box recommendation for how to use autocomplete. And it basically has the material design systems like UI as an autocomplete component. Another nice thing about having a raw version is that the material and Cupertino libraries, or like any design system for that matter, is always often changing and evolving. And so by making the code more modular in our framework, it allows us to adapt quickly. It also helps us to look ahead to support design systems in our other newer supported platforms, for example, for web and desktop. If we ever want to make an autocomplete, not autocomplete, a design library for any of the other platforms, it would be a lot easier if we had a general version of autocomplete to base our UI on top of. In terms of flexibility, one of the requested features was a split UI API. So basically, if you didn't want the autocomplete suggestions in an overlay and you wanted the suggestions to show up on a different part of your UI, basically looking at this GIF, for example, you can basically make your selections show up not as a dropdown, but in a different part of your screen. And there are examples on how to do this in the API documentation. And if there isn't any, if it's not clear enough how to do it, please file an issue. It should also allow the users to customize the results based on the results shown based on what values in the field. And the third item is accessibility. And basically, this goes back to what Hillel wanted, like how do we handle keyboard navigation on web and desktop when we do voiceover and talkback? Is that done right? And we want to make sure that we get this right because this was the main request for Hillel. So after a few months and a few thousand lines of code by Justin and a few rounds of code reviews by the community and our team, we have the functionality of autocomplete merged into Flutter, and it's already available, as I mentioned before, in Flutter 2. The code review process involved, like I mentioned already, multiple members of the team and the review. And, sometimes we went back to design doc to update terminology as we iterated on the design and incorporated new ideas to the existing design. So here's some technical stuff about it. I know there's a code block, but don't pay too much attention to it. It's not super important. But we wanted to emphasize how composition played a huge part in creating the widget. Since Flutter is all about composition, the UI for autocomplete was actually based on a lot of existing lower level widgets already present. So for example, the material design version of autocomplete is just basically a list view with inkwell and text widgets. I think if you look at, actually, no, not this part. But another idea is also for the autocomplete text field itself, it is just a text field widget and a list view. It's a text form field widget. So if you look at the code block and the red circle, that's basically a small snippet of the autocomplete field widget that we use for the material UI version. And what's really cool about this is you can basically create your own third-party Flutter package, or your Flutter application can extend upon these existing widgets and even the autocomplete widget with relative ease. So here's a quick sample code for how to use the autocomplete widget. So I'm going to quickly go over what options builder is, and it's basically just a filter for determining which autocomplete suggestions you want to provide to the user. Usually you provide the list of strings that contain substrings of what's already in the field, but you can basically put in whatever you want and write your own filter. But here basically we iterate over a list of strings to determine if the current autocomplete string is contained in any of the strings in the list. The onSelected parameter is just basically a callback that gets invoked whenever an autocomplete suggestion is selected. And here all it does is it prints to the console with the selection that was made. Okay, so far Hillel seems happy with what we've put forward, and he's provided actually more feedback ever since Flutter 2 was released, and we created new issues, and then we updated the design docs with the suggestions he's made as well. And we hope will continue to deliver as we add more functionality to autocomplete. But some of the main things we need to add still is keyboard support, async support. Yeah, those are the two main things that I can think of right now, and it's already on the slides. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. If you're interested in providing feedback for or reporting a bug with autocomplete, go on GitHub, file an issue, or add a comment on the design doc. Yeah. So okay. I hope that walking through how the autocomplete widget came to be was helpful, and it helps you guys understand how Flutter issues are scoped, designed, and worked on by the Flutter team. Almost every major Flutter feature goes through a very similar process. So feel free to participate in any part of the process, whether it's contributing reproducible bug samples, participating in doc design discussions, or even filing a PR yourself. Don't hesitate to contribute for parts of the framework that you're particularly interested in. You can hop onto GitHub and look at our wiki for more information on how to contribute and stuff like the style guide and suggestions for how to get started. We have a few very prolific open source contributors, and they're always actively adding features or fixing bugs in all parts of the framework. And I've always found it really enjoyable to work with them because I find that I'm also able to learn some things from like reading their code and like understanding their issues and their thought processes. Cool. Thank you all for tuning into this event. Thanks to the hosts. I'll be able to answer any questions about the presentation or about Flutter in general during the Q&A later. Yeah, hope you guys enjoy the rest of this event.
Cool. Thank you for that, Xiao. It gives us a lot of insight how the Flutter team, choose a feature to work on and of course develop.
Yeah. So I didn't know it worked out like that. And actually, for a pretty big team, that's pretty optimized, no?
That's right.
I think it works pretty well.
Cool.
Yeah. And even though it's open source, you guys deliver very fast iterations. It's really cool.
Thanks. I'm glad to hear that.
So yeah, so there are actually a few questions in here already, but let's answer them later. So if people have more answers, we'll be having more topics to answer on our panel discussion and question and answer. So let's continue with our next speaker. So thank you for that, Sir Shiao. So Sir Pao, are you
Yeah.
ready? Oh, there you go. Hello, Sir
Hi,
Pao.
evening.
No.
Sorry, looks like we're a little bit early. Was kind of expecting at 6:30, but well, since we're already live, I guess we can start. Let me try
Cool.
sharing.
Okay.
Let me. Okay, just checking. Can everybody see the screen? Is it being shared properly?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So, as mentioned earlier by Johnny and Z, I'm from Stratpoint. I'm the current mobile group head. The main point of my talk today is really finding Flutter cross-platform journey. It's been over several years since we've really started going through various tools. Reasons why will be stated later in the talk, but hopefully some of the discoveries, some of the analysis, and some of the discoveries that we made along the way may be helpful for you as we go along. So first off, so really, the talk is portioned into three main parts. Really, what really started the search, as in why did we start searching for new tools? Why did we look at cross-platform in general? Then the second main section is about the exploration and the major categories of the tools that we encountered along the way, as in what particular tools, frameworks, platforms that we saw throughout the years, and then general categories and what were their pros and cons. Then the final part of the talk would be on how Flutter, one of our latest discoveries, in fact, our latest discovery is now part of our development toolbox. A little bit of how we use it and why it would be a great reason why now is one of the best times to really get into Flutter. So as Shihao mentioned as well, I won't be going so much, but Flutter 2.0 just very recently released. So, and a lot of it bodes well for the future. So really start off what really started the search. As in, it's a grill quest actually for programmers, developers, that at our core, we really build things and technology is always accelerating and improving. So part of our nature is really finding ways of building things faster, building things better. So some people might have heard, okay, this is the new silver bullet or the new magical solution to all your technical problems. So we haven't really found one yet, despite it being several decades in computing. And I believe it's never really going to end, that it's a never-ending search and constant journey of improvement from one technology to the next. There's always been that concept of us searching for the unobtainable. And what we could, and actually the final dream, obviously, is maybe we could just say something and the machine, just like a magical genie, would bring it into existence automatically. But the truth is, development isn't really that easy. It's complex. Development and software really reflects the reality of the world around us. And some of you might be familiar with this comic series of the XCD. Now, some of you might be familiar with these jokes in particular, wherein you have all modern digital infrastructure supported by a random small package or plugin maintained by a single developer in Nebraska since so many years ago. And anybody who's experienced walking through or debugging another person's code sometimes encounters this situation wherein you get hopelessly lost in a jungle and confused about all of the all of the implementations because we lack context. So on that particular joke, it sounds like a joke, but it's very much really a reality. There was an incident, I believe, a year or 2 years back, wherein a particular node package got taken down by an author, and suddenly quite a number of large applications around the world went down because it was part of the dependency tree. And to strike a little bit more at home for us as Flutter, a few days ago, pub.dev went down for some time. So at that point in time, it was really hard to get the particular dependencies. So because of the complexity of development, simplifying things really brings an advantage, a distinct and competitive edge. If you can build things faster than the rest, if you can reduce your cost of development, if you can maintain quality while bringing down the other two factors, it really makes a big difference. So this brings into why we went towards multi-platform, because of several promises which are very highly appealing. So, of course, being multi-platform or cross-platform, there's that concept of a build one and then it's now deployable to all, whether it be Android, iOS, and more. So not having to have a separate code base for these various channels, being able to unify the effort instead of having multiple developers or even multiple teams for each particular channel. And of course, having that singular approach also removes a lot of complexity, both in managing communications, architecture, and implementation, since the architectures between iOS and Android aren't exactly the same. So certain unique problems may arise when developing both simultaneously. So another particular big promise, which is why we went towards cross-platform, is this would potentially allow for leaner operations, allow you to maximize your team to its fullest potential. You may not necessarily need to have an iOS expert and an Android expert at the same time in the same team just to develop a single app on those two particular channels at the same time. So again, simplifying the approach would bring down your cost while maintaining your speed. Now, another was we noticed that for quite a lot of need of development, there's that concept of just good enough, wherein trying to implement optimizations, there's a particular point where it's just not worth the effort. As in, let's say reducing the response of an API from maybe zero point 0.4 seconds to maybe like zero point 0.2 or even zero point 0.1, but it would take an additional 2 to 3 weeks before deployment, may not necessarily provide the value that you would need. So we noticed that quite a lot of features, you just needed to be just good enough to provide the value which you really needed. And not that many applications would really require the edge cases or bleeding edge optimization, or even maximizing the particular output of your mobile device. So most generally would follow certain standard patterns and certain implementations, such as maybe REST, and then would follow certain UX patterns and UI. And that one, as long as it's sufficient, would more often than not provide enough value for your client or for creating your own product. Good examples of this are certain e-commerce applications or like for example Food Panda, etc., they all generally provide the same functionality. And if you can provide that functionality with what you have with your tech stack, then it's good enough to provide the maximum value without necessarily having diminishing returns. So this brought us now to the cross-platform, because with cross-platform, you build once for all. It brings down your cost on your team, so then you don't need separate handling. And for a lot of these cross-platform tools, it would be sufficient for the use case at hand. So definitely, you wouldn't need any special API specific, iOS specific, Android specific, device specific functionality. Therefore, the cross-platform approach would really be a valid approach, providing you with all the benefits of all three at the same time. So part of the journey was really finding the right fit, finding the right tool, finding out the pros and cons, seeing how things work for us as we were developing our apps. So to give you kind of an idea on of the journey, was we kept on trying new things. So all the way back in 2014, we had a small affair with Cordova and PhoneGap, wherein we tried it out for a few apps, tried it out on a few projects. Then we tried Ionic, which was built on top of Cordova. Then the next year, we tried out a particular cross-platform solution, which was called IBM Mobile First. Then, as we kept on searching for the appropriate fit, we eventually stumbled upon React Native. I think the first version that we tried out was 0.12. So we were really trying to see whether the promise on the initial releases would really deliver. Then more recently, in 2018, when Flutter released out of beta into Flutter 1.0, that was when we really started investing more effort into checking out this great new cross-platform solution. And the final item, as you all know, Flutter 2.0 just recently released last March 3. So quite exciting. And here in Stratpoint, we're really looking forward to all the new functionality and all the improvements that this brings. So a lot in the journey was really this never-ending debate between cross-platform and native development. As in, I don't think this particular debate will ever end. I also don't think that it will ever have a clear winner. But it would throughout the years, it was always okay. Native is faster. Cross-platform costs less because you don't need as many developers. Cross-platform has a more unified approach, etc., etc. So there were times wherein it really matched, and it was really a matter of selecting the right tool. Wherein we had some projects where cross-platform really was the right choice, some where it wasn't, really partially due to misunderstood requirements, among other things. While on the other hand, for iOS and Android, there were some projects where it was the only clear choice, wherein there were some where we were pushing a new functionality unique particularly to an iOS API. So that one, there wasn't really a choice, since there wasn't really a particular equivalent in the cross-platform domain at that point. So again, this debate has so many facets, so many different proponents, that it's practically one of the classics now. So among the large category, one of the large categories of implementations that we encountered during the search was generally the web-based implementation. So the ones which use a web technology as a medium. So Cordova, and technically the paid version, which is PhoneGap, and then Ionic, which builds on top of the open source Cordova, generally are all web-based, wherein the cross-platform medium which they chose to leverage was web technology in HTML. So you generally just have a web view at the front, and it loads your code and interpreter, which is now displayed technically as a web view or web page. Now, one of the things, this was quite useful, especially in some projects with Cordova, where it definitely delivered on the promise, wherein it was a single code base and we were able to deploy it to both iOS and Android. And then this definitely brought down cost, and this also helped a little bit with time. So really, it did deliver on its promise. However, some of the problems that we encountered at this particular time was sometimes this would require additional resources, wherein our package or our IPA, APA, APK ended up getting a little bit bloated, which is completely natural because now you have the added interpreter. And this, because of the web technology, sometimes it required additional resources, so it impacted performance. And one of the more egregious problems, especially in some projects, was that sometimes you'll encounter edge case errors or issues wherein it might not behave or look the same way between the mobile devices, between iOS or Android. Sometimes even because it's a known issue because of the incompatibility with the web engines in the mobile device itself. So sometimes in the mobile device, the main base web engine would be Chromium based, while in iOS it's always been WebKit. And then the small differences in how those web engines were implemented would sometimes affect the application itself. So we encountered some problems like this. So which moved on. So the next sorry, before I move on to that, a little bit on the architecture of these general web-based applications, wherein you have a rendering engine in between, which renders everything that you make into a web-compatible view. So then your Cordova plugins, your API, in order for the native iOS native device functionality, would then be plugged into the rendering engine and communicate towards the mobile OS itself. So as mentioned, this may have its own problems due to performance, and then especially if the rendering engine is different between certain devices. So we found this a little bit hard to control at times. So one main lesson that we learned from here is that, especially around the need for requirements, sometimes certain projects would require really the native look and feel. So we found that really hard to replicate, and frankly, not really worth the effort, because there are all sorts of small little niceties in terms of UX that both Android and iOS implement on their default native components, which aren't easily replicated on a particular web view. Well, as is anyway. Then, so another major section, another major category, sorry, that we encountered was platform solutions. There are quite a number of companies who tried this approach. And however, the one which we encountered in particular was the IBM Mobile First. The sub tagline actually is buying into the ecosystem, because generally you created your own platform. It would help develop your cross-platform applications. However, the main problem here is that you had to be highly invested in the particular ecosystem of that particular platform. So you got both the advantages of the entire platform as a whole, but also the chains and lock-in and disadvantages of the platform as well. So this is generally an architecture of how the mobile first operates, wherein you have native IDEs and then the mobile first server. Then you install the mobile first application center, which communicates to the runtime and the hosted solution on the actual mobile device. So I won't bore you so much with all the general details, but the main, as in when we set this up, everything worked smooth, meaning the deployment, how we would manage the application, how we would manage the users, how we would share the components between the various other applications that we would build on this platform. Everything went smooth as long as you fit into that particular platform guidelines. Where we started encountering problems was of course, the initial setup, because in order just to create your starting app, you would have to set up the platform as a whole. So you needed to set up the application center, the server, the hosting server itself, as well as all the configurations for the actual applications themselves. And when we started getting requirements, oh, can you replace the deployment server with, let's say, for example, AWS? Or can we integrate other cloud implementations into the platform itself in order to provide already available functionality? That's when we started encountering problems. So in essence, we started getting inflexible when we had to break out of this particular ecosystem or this particular walled garden. But as long as we stayed within it, there was no problem whatsoever. In fact, it over delivered in terms of the speed, in terms of the quality. However, for quite a lot of clients, it's never really this ideal situation wherein you have a fully invested and fully implemented full ecosystem wherein everything is within that ecosystem, fully controlled. You have no external, etc. So the final main group, actually, of our final main category, which we really encountered, was the bridges or intermediates, wherein it's not really a web view, but it would try to bridge the general cross-platform language, which you would be developing in, towards the actual native components or mobile OS or even the compiler directly. So each had their own varying approach and each had their own varying advantages. So for example, React Native, which went for the JavaScript bridge, although again, their architecture recently changed. Then Flutter, which is basically direct to machine code or direct to the compiler. Then Xamarin, which has a separate approach for both iOS and Android, wherein for Android, it's particularly on an intermediate language, which is just in time compiled, while for iOS, it leverages the selectors and registers in order to communicate with the underlying C++. So again, Xamarin, it's really C# everywhere. And then basically using C#, it would, for the Android at least, it would use an intermediate language to convert the C# more or less into just compiled code for the native and for the Android runtime. While for the iOS, they created a form of they leveraged selectors and registers, which they refer to as bindings to communicate with the underlying iOS APIs. Then the React Native approach, this is actually the first architecture. And again, we encountered some problems around this. Because if you might notice around the JavaScript bridge, there's the JSON in between. Again, this impacted performance, and there were some issues as well on the debugging. Because let's say you had an issue or an error that traversed from from your created JavaScript towards the native code, the bridge wouldn't exactly interpret it that well, meaning you'd get your stack trace from the JS side, and then you'd be able to trace it all the way to the bridge. But then you'd have to switch to a new logger or implementation in order to trace that particular error towards the invoking native modules or mobile OS. So, which is why, after hearing years of feedback from the community, React has also more recently transitioned to their new architecture, wherein they removed the particular bridge and they removed the serialization and deserialization of the JSON as the medium of communication into the JSI or the interface, wherein it kind of resembles the architecture of Flutter in a way, wherein it now attempts to go directly to the compiler. So then, of course, Flutter Approach, wherein it's about as direct as it gets without really being native. So this platform compiles directly to your relevant compiler. So now this, however, has its own pros and cons. So again, I still don't believe there's a one size fits all and a magic tech solution that will solve all tech problems. So I still believe in use the right tool for the right job. So for Flutter, it definitely has a appeal wherein its definite pro is that you'll definitely get the best performance so far, at least in my own experience. So and appearance is definitely going to be the same between the various platforms. Well, at least relatively speaking to the other cross-platform solutions. However, this is also a potential disadvantage in the sense that since Flutter doesn't necessarily invoke native components like how React does. Um, if let's say iOS or Android pulls off a huge refactor to their native look and feel, Flutter won't necessarily follow through. Meaning, you might have to wait for Flutter to adjust to that particular style. One good example of when this occurred was when you transitioned from iOS 6 to iOS 7, when it was before the current flat design of iOS, wherein you still had those bezels and drop shadow. Um, if something similar to that happens in the future, and the Flutter components are still designed for the current design paradigm, it would still maintain the current design paradigm and would not necessarily update upon that particular OS upgrade. So again, after going through all of these particular tools, why do we finally regard Flutter as one of in fact our mainstay for cross-platform now? One is that it's DevOps Fit and Ready, as in DevOps is, if not already the norm, it's at least not the exception, meaning everybody nowadays really is starting to transition or has already transitioned towards DevOps, and Flutter and its attendant APIs and tools fit this quite well with its rich documentation, its CLI, among others. So what do we mean by this? In Stratpoint, we generally use GitLab as our main CI/CD and orchestrator. So from planning and creating on our main error issues board, we have documentation and verifying. Then on GitLab, we leverage Flutter's very own strong tools for packaging, creating the apps. So if you're not yet familiar with the Flutter CLI or the Flutter command line tool, it's one of the easiest and well, for me in particular, it's the easiest mobile CLI that I've used so far. Wherein, if you want to package, it's a simple command. You don't have to delve into archaic documentation. It's easy to identify certain problems. It's easy to configure as well. And for release, it also has very adept tools for that as well as for configuration for various lanes, environments, etc. And by default, it has its own built-in testing libraries and even potentially monitoring and instrumentation. So all of that you get by default, even without any additional plugins or configurations. So again, with DevOps, sometimes not everybody has the same tool set. Not everybody has the same pipeline. So as you can see here in a sample DevOps tools ecosystem sample, with all the tools out there, it becomes vitally important that you can configure and mix and match. So for some clients, or maybe for some products, for their analytics, they might not prefer App Dynamics, but they might want Dynatrace. Or let's say, for example, they don't want Appcelerator, they may want Flurry, etc., etc. It's always good to keep in mind that whatever tool or whatever framework that you use is easily adaptable to whatever situation or whatever tool set you might need. Now, one of the main concepts behind this is, with GitLab and Flutter, we were able to leverage pipeline as code. So this gives us flexibility, ability to configure easily able to maintain our templates or our pipeline templates, and easy to find out who changed the configurations and to have better accountability. So because everything's in code, and if your code is checked into your version, easy to track. You can do git blame. Like if your pipeline's no longer working and you find out that somebody changed your configuration, easy to track, easy to change. Now, I mentioned earlier the Flutter CLI because at the end of the day, the command line is really one of the foundations and roots for quite a lot of this. Now, with Flutter, some of you might be familiar with this particular command line wherein you create your app with a very simple command. And the CLI actually has quite a lot of other very useful commands in order to test, in order to analyze, in order to generate your packages, and even to check your installation. The Flutter Doctor, one of the most useful things in the Flutter CLI. So in the end, if anything fails, your command line tool supporting your framework or your tool can really help bridge that gap. And really, in the end, you can create your own pipeline even through scripts alone if necessary or if need be. So another implementation that we use is we try to monitor quality, because what you don't really know, you can't really fix. So we try to match certain standards or baseline code standards, and then on the particular analytics, we try to implement SonarQube and App Dynamics for various code sets, as well as gotchas. So basically, app performance, app decks, in order to become as data driven as we possibly can. In order to find out really what is wrong, how to easier debug our applications, and to see whether we're really delivering. Then, especially nowadays in the pandemic, it becomes more important now to be able to still deploy fast and to still deploy over the air or remotely. So these are generally the top four which we tend to use. The official test flight and Google Play beta for iOS and Android respectively, and unofficially we use App Center Test Fairy. The top two, or the official channels, have a distinct advantage in that, well, distinct advantage and disadvantage in that there has a review process. So if you really need to get a test build out quick, especially the first test build, it may not be as quick as you want because there's still an approval process. However, this is also an advantage in that this reduces your approval time when you're eventually pushing to prod or the actual stores. Now, on the other hand, the unofficial solutions on the bottom, you're able to get out the test build within extremely quickly or immediately. However, you still have to go through the default approval process when you eventually push this to the App Store or Google Play. So really, it's just picking what fits your situation at the particular moment. Then again, for Flutter, it has so many tools, plugins, libraries which can really help accelerate your development. So for our mobile deployment, we try to leverage Fastlane. The main reason why is generally from project to project or from product to product. Sometimes we may need to abstract certain deployment tasks between our CI/CD pipelines. So sometimes there's Jenkins, sometimes it's GitLab, sometimes we have to port it to Bamboo. And Fastlane adds that additional layer of abstraction so we don't have to reconfigure to start all the code pipelines from scratch. Then JSON serializable, of course, helps you serialize from your JSON responses from your API, freezed as well, to help with that for the immutability. Then FlutterGen, in order to avoid particular problems with string-based APIs. So with all of these available tools, the great documentation of Flutter, and how Flutter really fits in so well with modern DevOps tool sets, you would there isn't really any reason why you wouldn't really want to get into it as your cross-platform solution as of now. Again, it's not necessarily perfect, but it's a definitely a really strong tool which you will definitely want in your toolbox, especially now with the more recent Flutter 2.0, wherein there's potential support for web. So again, this is actually the end of my presentation. So to start, we started off with the reasons why we started cross-platform solutions. I gave you an overview onto the my own journey and my own exploration through various solutions. And I discussed part of the toolbox, how we currently use this, and why it would be great to use this now. So if you have any questions, here's my email. Just please don't spam me, please. And as usual, it's the same as self promotion. So, Z, yes, we are hiring. So, apply now if you want to. And feel free to follow us at Stratpoint on Facebook or Instagram for some of our talks, some of our topics. So, thank you everybody for listening to me for the past half hour. I'll hand you back to Z and the hosts for the rest of the event.
Thanks, Paolo.
Thanks, Sir Pao.
It's it's a good story. It kind of sounds like a quest for the Holy Grail, and I can imagine Paolo and Z wearing wearing a knight's costume and stuff like that. But it's
So it's
actually very
basically
good.
our yeah.
Yeah,
I
go,
wanted to
go.
put a Monty Python theme, but
There
I
you
might
go. I
I
was
might show
thinking the
my
same
age.
thing. Yeah, you
So
will
this is
have those
basically our origin
corners.
story.
Yeah,
Nice, nice. It's actually good for people who starting out as well. I mean, at least you can ease their pain from looking for a good solution, and
yeah.
Flutter is it.
So
Yeah.
thanks. I hope my story is useful for those out there. So thanks,
Yeah, it's the
Hope
origin
Z.
story
so.
of Stratpoint. So yeah, it's very good. So hopefully for the questions, we will be answering them later on our Q&A. And I think there are a few of you who are asking about processes and stuff. So we'll get to that later. Thanks, Sir Pao. And
Thanks.
hmm, I think we have Sir Zennon already here in our yeah, there he is. Morning,
There
Sir
you
Z.
go.
Morning.
Oh, hi. Good evening, pala. My mistake. So,
That's what.
Sir Z, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. I was actually confused who Paolo was talking to. Was it you or me?
Yeah, because my nickname is also Z.
Yeah. So hi
Um,
Z.
Hi Z. It's Z.
Right. So
So,
I'm
Sir
just
Zenon,
preparing to share my screen. If you have any preliminary questions, go ahead.
nothing at the moment, so we can get to that later when we go to the panel discussion. So
Sure.
yeah.
yes. Sounds good. All right, take
How's
it away.
everyone?
Okay, cool.
Oh, you want me to start now?
Yeah, you can start anytime. So we will be doing a bit
Awesome.
of background now.
Okay.
Thank you,
Hello,
sir.
everyone. Thank you as well. Hello, everyone. How is everyone? Just looking at the comments. Okay. So, welcome to the GitHub Actions Flutter workflows. It's basically my opinionated GitHub Action workflows for your Flutter projects. Okay. So, I'm Zenon Gosalves. You can call me Z. I'm the current Chief Technology Officer of ThinkBit Solutions, but primarily I do project management and some DevOps work in our company. So, if you plan to do some like DevOps and integrating with your pipelines and making sure everything works from a personal level or for your entire team. And if you need help, feel free to reach out. Okay, so that's basically it for my intro. Let's get started. So the outline of my talk will have these topics. So first off, we'll have an introduction of CI/CD, then GitHub Actions, then we'll have a demo, and I'll show you my advanced and optimized workflows. So a quick introduction to CI/CD. So CI/CD can mean CI, continuous integration, and CD for either continuous delivery or continuous deployment. The next few slides will discuss what the differences are, especially with delivery and deployment. But first off, let's discuss continuous integration. So continuous integration, or CI, services allow you to run your tests automatically when pushing new code changes. You've seen this definitely if you visited the web page as seen here. It's the Flutter Dev Docs on testing and integrating using continuous integration services. So that's the definition of CI. So to paraphrase this, if you want to run your tests automatically, whenever you push your code changes to GitHub, then you can use CI services. Another definition of CI is a process that runs automated builds and tests once a person commits a change to a configured repository on GitHub. So just like what I said earlier, and it is a common best practice in software development that helps detect errors. Okay. So as you can see, the source for this code is from GitHub itself. So that is basically CI. Now let's go to the difference between the two CDs. First off is CDev, or continuous delivery. It is the practice of developing software in such a way that you could release it at any time. Okay, so you'll see that the reference here is a YouTube video, but actually if you visit this link, this is an actual GitHub Action video, or rather a video on GitHub Actions by GitHub. And they define continuous delivery as a practice of developing software so that you could release it at any time. So say you pushed your code on GitHub, then GitHub can automatically create your build artifacts so that you can download those artifacts and upload it to either Google Play, App Store Connect, or maybe upload it to your web server. So that's continuous delivery. Next is continuous deployment. It is a process that allows you to actually deploy new developed features into production with confidence and experience, if any little downtime. So the definition for continuous deployment kind of overlaps between continuous delivery because both of them allows you to create build artifacts. But the main difference with continuous deployment is that it immediately sends your build to the environment that you want to deploy it to. So whenever you push your code, instead of just building artifacts, GitHub can actually send your code to either Google Play, App Store Connect, and or your web server. So it automatically releases your code depending on whether you want it to be released on a staging environment or your actual production environment. So that's the main difference between continuous delivery, which has a human intervention aspect into it, and continuous deployment, which is a total automation of your deployment process. So if you have any questions, just leave it in the comments. We'll get back to it later during the Q&A section of my talk. So that's it for the introduction of CI/CD. Let's now go to a more like diagram perspective of how it all works. So say you're a single developer and this is your typical workflow. So first you develop your app features using hot reload, right? Then after developing your feature, you build and test it using Flutter test command maybe, right? Then after you build and test your code, you then build for release. Say you run Flutter build APK or iOS or AAB. Then whatever build artifact was generated, you upload it to Google Play, App Store Connect, or your web server. Then for the last step, which what I was just mentioning, was to actually release those build artifacts. Okay. So where does CI/CD come in? So say you have your GitHub environment here. So that's basically your code repository. You develop and test your code. That's your first step here. And when you push your changes to the repository, what we want to happen is GitHub will build and test your code, build it for release, then actually release it. Okay. And how will that look? So first off, obviously CI will take care of building and testing your code. It makes sure that all of your feature changes, all of your bug fixes doesn't break any other part of your code. Okay. Next is build for release. So that's C delivery. So in this perspective, there's a lot of overlap happening. When you want to run C delivery, you also want to make sure that it also build and tested your code before actually creating your build artifacts. You don't want to create build artifacts when those artifacts weren't actually tested, right? So that's why there's an overlap of CI and C delivery. More importantly, especially since C deployment is a total automation of all of those workflows, we want to make sure that your code is buildable, testable, and can actually create build artifacts before it, deploys automatically to Google Play, App Store Connect, or your web server. So again, if you have any questions, definitely leave a comment. We'll go back to it in a bit. Next. So for CI, we want to ensure everyone's code changes integrate. How will that work? For a bigger team, we want to make sure that, say, your first developer develops feature A, developer 2 develops feature B, and so on, and everyone pushes to the same code repository. We want to make sure that all of your features integrate with one another and they don't break any other features that someone else is developing. And definitely, we don't want to, introduce bugs that's not related. So for example, for developer A who's developing feature A, we don't want him to or her to create a feature that introduces bugs to other parts of the application that he or she didn't touch, right? And definitely, we want to reduce merge conflicts. So say developer A and B are working on the same feature, so feature A, we want to make sure that developer A and developer B have very minimal merge conflicts. So that's one of the main benefits of having CI on a larger scale and for a larger project and a larger team. The benefits of having these workflows really come into play when we're talking about really, really large projects. But definitely, as you've seen earlier, it can still be applied for your personal projects, for a one-person team project. So that's it for an introduction of CI/CD. Let's now go into the introduction to GitHub Actions. So first off, what are GitHub Actions? GitHub Actions automate, customize, and execute your software development workflows right in your repository. So think of it as your CI services. So GitHub Actions allows you to create those CI services on GitHub itself. So whenever you create, push, or release on GitHub, you can trigger all of those automations to run specific code for your Flutter project. So I keep saying workflows, but there's a technical definition of workflows in GitHub Actions. And a workflow is a configurable automated process made up of one or more jobs. You must create a YAML file to define your workflow configuration. As you can see on the screenshot here, we have ci.yml. So as it implies, this is my workflow for my CI. So continuous integration workflow runs on pull request and it has these jobs. So I have a job for checking security hardening. I have jobs for testing and creating coverage reports. Okay, so as we discussed earlier, CI allows us to build and test code automatically. And it is through the workflows that we create that we can achieve those automations. So that's workflows. Next concept that I want to discuss is event triggers. I mentioned earlier that the CI YAML file will only be triggered on pull requests. So that pull request is actually an event trigger. And what it means is that you can configure your workflows to run when specific activities on GitHub happens. So in my CI workflow earlier, the specific activity that happens on GitHub that I want to run that workflow on is pull requests. Okay. Or we can have it on a scheduled time. We can have workflows run using the cron syntax. And of course, we can also run workflows using webhooks. Okay, so as you can see here, we have two screenshots. The one on top is C delivery, and it runs on every push. And the one at the bottom is deployment.yaml, and it runs on every release. Okay, so just to recap, the steps you're seeing down here are actual jobs for those workflows. So this workflow here on top, C delivery workflow, runs on every push, and the jobs that it runs are check security hardening, then it drafts a release, then deployment runs the following jobs, so security hardening, verifying a clean release, testing, and building your artifacts. Okay, so that's event triggers. So another concept that I keep on mentioning is jobs and steps. So this is the last concept that I want to discuss before we go through some examples of GitHub Actions and workflows. So jobs and steps basically are your building blocks for workflows. So a workflow run is made up of one or more jobs, and a job contains a sequence of tasks called steps. And steps can run commands or run an action. Okay, so if we just look at the previous slide here, so these are our jobs, and inside of those jobs are steps. Okay. So steps can either run commands. So for example, Flutter test or Flutter build APK. Or it can run an action. And actions are pre-made scripts that you can find on the GitHub marketplace. So instead of creating your own script or commands to, for example, install Flutter, there's an actual action here in the GitHub marketplace that installs Flutter for you on your server. Now let's have a look at some of the examples that I have. So for my simple examples, let's start with the CI. And the ci.yaml file would look something like this. So we have a name for our workflow. It's named CI. Then we talked about event triggers. So when will CI run? It will run on every pull request to the branch main. So whenever you create a pull request that merges a branch into main, then this workflow will run. Now, what jobs will run on this workflow? So we can see that here, it only has one job, and it's called test. And this test job has a name, obviously, as it shows here, test. And it runs on a server, which is an Ubuntu with the latest operating system version. Okay, we have to specify what kind of server we want to run on, especially on whenever we build on iOS. Definitely we'll need to use a Mac-based server. We can't use any other servers to run our code, and especially building your iOS artifacts. So what does this job do? It has these steps. So the syntax for using a pre-made script on the GitHub marketplace, so pre-made actions, is to use the keyword uses. And we have this action here called action/checkout at v2. So actions is the namespace or the account on GitHub, and this is the repository checkout. Then this is the tag or release version of that script. And as it implies, what this does is it actually checks out your code. So if we don't use this script here, then we won't be able to run our code or actually see any of our code since we haven't checked out the repository. So most of the time, this is what you'll use first, action/checkout. So once we've checked out our repository, we can now install Flutter. So like I mentioned earlier, this first part is the owner or the account of the script. Then this is the name of the repository, so Flutter-action. And this is the version or release number, or the tag number rather, of this script here. And what this does is it installs the Flutter command. So you won't have to manually install Flutter on your Ubuntu server. Okay. And once we have checked out your code, then installed Flutter, we can now run Flutter test. Okay. So think of these first two steps as prerequisites to run. So run is the keyword to run your commands as you would on your command line. Okay. The best way to try this out or to build your workflows is actually to try it out on your own computer. So if you want to automate something, you better make sure that it actually works on your local machine. So if Flutter test doesn't work on your machine, then definitely you'll have some problems setting up your own automation. Okay. So that's it for this example here, ci.yaml. And this is what we want to cover based on our earlier diagram. That workflow covers the build and test step of our development workflow. Next one that we want to cover is, we may have duplicated my slide here. Okay, we just skip a bit. Okay, so this is a screenshot of how it would look like on GitHub. So whenever that workflow runs, you'll find that workflow in the Actions tab, and you'll find obviously the name of the commit, the run number, the run ID, and the name of your workflow. Okay. So you'll see that there is indeed just only one job, and the name of the job is test. You can also see how long that job took to finish. So it took me around almost 2 minutes to complete a test on your GitHub action. So definitely, even if you're a solo developer and you have a really slow machine, then you can definitely leverage GitHub Actions and take advantage of their faster CI servers if you think that your machine can't handle running your tests at a reasonable time. So that's it for the CI workflow. What we want to cover next is C delivery, which covers build and test and build and release. Now, what does it look like? So I separated the file into two screenshots, but it's just one file. It's cdelivery.yml. Okay, so the name is cdelivery, and the event trigger that we have is on every push to the branch main. Okay, and what jobs do we want to run on cdelivery? We copied the code from ci.yml. Again, we want to make sure that our code, our app runs and the tests pass before we actually build our artifacts. And once these tests pass, we run these jobs. So we have 3 jobs here. We build the APK, obviously that's for Android, build IPA, that's for iOS, and build web for obviously web. Okay. And let's have a look at build APK first. So we have a name, build for release APK. And notice we have a new keyword here called needs. So it needs the build test. Okay, so this one. So build APK won't run if this job here doesn't pass or never runs. Okay. This build APK needs test to be successful before it runs build APK. Again, we have runs on. So what server will build APK run on, and what are the steps to build the APK? So again, we need to check out our code, install Flutter, then run Flutter build APK. Now, after building our APK, that's not the last step. We need to upload that artifact somewhere, that APK file somewhere. And we can leverage this script here. It's called action/upload artifact. And we can use the parameters name and path. So we denote it with the with keyword and the variables. You can find this in the documentation of the script or the GitHub action upload artifact. And it asks you for the name of the artifact and where it will find your artifact so that it can upload it to GitHub. So whenever you run Flutter build APK, you'll find your release app in this path here. Okay. So like I mentioned earlier, these are some of the things that I did first on my computer, make sure it worked and make sure that I know how to code it here in my workflow. So I wouldn't be able to find this path here if I didn't actually run it myself on my computer. So the same goes with IPA and web. There's just some minor differences. So build IPA, obviously we need to run it on Mac OS. We can't build for iOS without running it on Macs. So we check out the code, install Flutter, we build using Flutter build IPA, and we upload the artifact. In this case, it's your Xcode archive. It's exported under build iOS archive, runner.exe archive. Okay. And the last one is build web. We can go back to Ubuntu latest here. And after checking out the code, installing Flutter, we can now run Flutter build web, and we can upload the artifacts from the build/web folder. Okay, so that seems to be very complicated. So for you visual learners, here is a screenshot. So we have that test job again that we had from CI, but now we also have 3 other jobs. So build for release APK, build for release IPA, and build for release web. And all 3 of them need test job to succeed. So if test failed, then none of these build jobs will run. Notice that build for release IPA failed. It will actually give you some annotations here. Process completed with exit code 1. Okay. But more importantly, like I mentioned earlier, the purpose of building for release, basically generating your build artifacts, is actually for you to download those artifacts. And since we use the upload artifact GitHub Actions script, we can find those artifacts at the bottom of the workflow or the run page on GitHub. So if we click on either of these artifacts, we'll be able to download those files. Okay, so that's for continuous delivery. Last, we have C deployment. And C deployment covers build and test, build for release, and of course, the new job here, which is release. And I think you know where I'm going here. So basically, we'll just copy our code from C delivery and just add on to it. Okay, so as you can see, we're just overlapping a lot of the jobs that we have in this diagram. And how would that look like? So again, these are 2 screenshots, but this is actually just from one file. And the name of the file is cdeployment.yml, and the name of the workflow here is cdeployment. On the left screenshot, it's just basically a copy paste of the C delivery workflow. And what I want to point out, so we can skip this, we already discussed this, except for build IPA. So for build IPA, we can't use XC archive So Xcode Archive. Since Xcode Archive requires further processing to generate the IPA file that we need to upload directly to, for example, Firebase for app distribution testing or even App Store Connect. So notice that I put a commit here to run bundle exec fastlane export IPA. So for those who were able to join, if I'm not mistaken, Paolo's talk, he mentioned something about using Fastlane to do some automations, especially with multi command line um, execution. So instead of running multiple commands, you can just run bundle exec, then that script that you want to run. And bundle exec fastlane or fastlane sum command can actually generate your IPA file from your XE archive. Okay, so notice that instead of uploading the artifact XE archive, we're now uploading build iOS runner.ipa. Okay, and we have two jobs for release. For the first job, it's release app. And notice that we need two jobs to complete before release app jobs can be run. So we need build APK to complete and build IPA to complete. So both of them have to complete before we run release app. Something a bit advanced here is using strategies on GitHub Actions. And what this does is it actually allows you to run this job for two things. So we can run release app for an APK and an IPA. Okay, so this job is actually a matrix job. So you'll see later that even if we coded it as just one job, since it's a matrix, it will run multiple jobs based on your strategy here. In our case, it will run two jobs, one for the APK file and another one for the IPA file. Regardless of the matrix that will run or the file that will run, the steps would be the same. So the first step would be to download the artifact. Notice that we didn't have to check out the code anymore. Since we don't need our source code, all we need is the artifact that was uploaded by our build jobs and just upload those artifacts to wherever we need to upload them. In this case, we want to upload it to Firebase for Firebase app distribution. So once we've downloaded the artifact using this syntax here, notice the syntax here references the matrix file keyword. So depending on which job is running, so if it's an APK, then the name here will be APK and the path will be app.apk. So the APK file will be downloaded as app.apk. Okay. Once we've downloaded those artifacts, we now run this script here. Again, obviously, I've run this on my computer first just to make sure it works before I added it in the workflow file. So we first install Firebase tools. We make sure that Firebase tools is executable. Then we run Firebase tools app distribution and distribute the app dot and whatever job file is running. So if it's an APK or IPA file, and we have your environment variable here, depending on what Firebase project you're uploading to. And lastly, we have release web. Okay, so for release web, we'll use a different script. Obviously, we're not using app distribution here. We're using Firebase tools deploy hosting, for example. So again, we download the artifact generated by our build job. Then after we download those artifacts, just make sure that your structure is a Firebase project. Otherwise, Firebase tools deploy won't work as it should. So just make sure whatever code you put in here in your workflows actually work in your local machine. Okay. So definitely I should have some other steps here restructuring my project so that it would work on Firebase tools deploy. Okay. So that's an example of C deployment, and this is how it would look like. We have our test job on the left side. So again, we copy pasted code from C delivery, but notice now that our build jobs are split into two, since our release jobs need different builds to complete. So our release app job need needs build for release APK and IPA. So these two are grouped together, and release web only needs build for release web. Okay. And even if this one failed, but this one passed, we were able to run release web since release web only needs build for release web to complete or to be successful. Okay, it's not dependent on build for release APK or IPA. And notice that since build for release IPA failed, even if APK passed, the release app job was never completed, or rather, it was never run at all. So that's it for the overview and examples. If you have questions, definitely put it in the comments. So to go to the next part of my talk, we can now go to a demo. So the demo, since we don't have enough time, my demo will primarily be more of a show and tell instead. So say we have, this sample repository that I created a few days ago or weeks ago. If you want to visit it, feel free to do so. So that's Gosalves demo GitHub Actions Flutter workflow. And let's go to that now in my browser here. You'll see that in my Actions tab, we have 3 items in our sidebar. So that's one for each workflow. We have a C delivery workflow, C deployment workflow, and CI workflow. So for our CI workflow, again, it runs on every pull request. So let's have a look at a pull request here. Let's see some closed ones and have a look at update README. So say we wanted to create or update our README file and create a pull request out of it. It will actually run checks since we created a workflow on every pull request. And you'll see that it ran the test job. And as you can see here, these were the steps under that job. So we have some GitHub only steps. So it set up the job. Then here are our steps. So we have checkout. So basically it's checking out our code, our repository. Then we also use this Flutter action script here, which installed Flutter on our server. Then we ran the command Flutter test. Okay. And the details are here. You'll see that it ran widget testing on our sample project, and you'll see that all tests passed. So that's an example of the CI based on the pull request method, or rather the event trigger. So say we merge the pull request, what would happen next is, since we have C delivery and C deployment to run on every push, then we can see that, notice when we merged this PR, it ran these 2 workflows, so C delivery and C deployment. C delivery, notice that it ran tests again, and it ran the build jobs, and it failed on building the IPA file. That's mainly because I didn't set up the certificates. So that's more for advanced setups that we won't go into this talk. But notice again, the build artifacts are here ready for you to download. But more importantly, what we want to look at is C deployment. So notice here that after building for release APK, but IPA failed, release app never ran, but build for release web was successful, but failed in release web. So we can take a look what happened here in release web. So if I click on this, we can see, okay, it was able to download the artifact, but it was no, it wasn't successful in uploading the code to Firebase because I didn't set up the Firebase app ID. I didn't know which Firebase project to upload my website to. So that's it for the simple demo. Let me just quickly go through some advanced and optimized workflows, especially for those who are really into DevOps or who really want to go into the CI/CD process of Flutter, of implementing it in your Flutter projects. So let's have a look here. What's so special about my opinionated, advanced, and optimized workflows? So the features of my workflows are: number one, it uses GitHub Flow as a release and branching strategy. And you have secured GitHub Actions. As you've noticed earlier, where we were using some scripts that weren't developed by us. So it poses some threats. Well, it definitely poses a threat in terms of the code that you're using. Since you're using open source code, anyone can just hijack someone else's script. And if you're using that script, then yeah, someone would be able to maybe download your code repository. At least it could get worse, right? Another benefit of having this workflow is you can actually pin your Flutter version. So if you have dev A using Flutter version 1 and you have dev 2 using Flutter 2, you want to make sure that your developers are aligned with the Flutter version that you're using. And you want to make sure that whenever you build stuff, you're building your APKs or your artifacts on a specific Flutter version and not just the latest version wherein your code might break. And it also shows, my workflows show you static analysis and modular tests with code coverage reports. My demo earlier doesn't show any code coverage and modular tests and even static analysis. It's just running Flutter tests. I also use release drafter and PR labeler, which are basically other GitHub actions to automatically draft releases on GitHub and automatically labels your PR. So it's just nice to have. No, definitely something that you might want to consider in your projects. And lastly, Dependabot. Dependabot was integrated into GitHub a few months or even years ago. And what's nice about Dependabot is it's not just for your JavaScript projects. It can actually detect whether or not your third-party GitHub actions or scripts. So for example, action slash checkout, the one that we were using earlier, was updated to a newer version, then GitHub can notify you of that newer version. So that's what's nice about Dependabot. You won't need to look into those third-party scripts and make sure that you're using the latest version. And this is how it would look like. There is less overlap since our CI will still run on every PR to main, but we want to restrict pushes to main. We don't want anyone to push to main. So the only way to make changes to your main branch, as I mentioned, we're using the GitHub flow as a release and branching strategy here. So any code in main is actually ready for release. And if you want to make changes to main, you need to create a PR. And when you create your PRs will test your code first before integrating it to main. Now, once you integrate that code into main, it runs C delivery. So whenever it's pushed to main, you have a push to main, it drafts a release on GitHub. Now, it doesn't actually generate artifacts just yet. The reason for that is we want to build those artifacts on the build for release phase. So notice that this is actually our deployment stage. Okay. So we have less overlap since we have protections on our main branch. So when we draft the release, no artifacts are made yet until you're ready to release your draft. And once you release your draft, that's the only time when the GitHub action will generate your build artifacts. So you can actually change this depending on whether you want to actually deploy automatically or just want to generate build artifacts. It's a case-to-case basis depending on your project and your team's agreed CI/CD workflow. So where can you find my workflows? You can go to Gosalves GitHub Actions Flutter Workflows. It's quite too long to discuss now, but I'll give you an overview of what you'll find in my repository. So notice that I've recently upgraded this to Flutter version 2, and I have for you very detailed description of what we discussed now and how to actually implement this on your projects. So the usage here, like I mentioned, is we need our workflows in the GitHub workflows folder. So I forgot to mention, sorry. Your workflows should be in the GitHub workflows folder. So this is where you'll find your workflows. And when you create those workflow files, like I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that our main and release branches are protected. We don't want anyone to accidentally like draft releases or even create deployments automatically. So we want to make sure that the main branch is actually just a branch that's ready for release and no untested code there. Okay. So the way for us to actually protect our code from hijack repositories, or rather our workflows that use third-party actions from hijack repositories, is to ensure championed actions. Championed actions basically look something like this. Notice earlier that our code for CI used checkout at v2. Notice in my example here, we're using at checkout at, then the hash code, the commit hash for that specific version. So even if someone pushes some code that's malicious in that third-party repository, you're more safe since you're locked into a specific commit, not to a specific branch or version. So that's what ensure championed action does. The other one that I mentioned earlier was to get a Flutter version environment, which requires a modification of pubspec.yaml. So since I have a few seconds left, definitely go through the README. If you have any questions for later, definitely leave a comment, or for more details, just reach out. So these are some of the references that we used earlier. And like I mentioned, reach out, definitely reach out. Here are some links wherein you can reach out to me for additional guidance and for consultation. So that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thanks for that
Excellent.
enlightening talk, Sir Zennon. It's very
Yeah.
eye-opening for how GitHub Actions work, no? So it's
Mm-hmm.
actually free to use for like
Well,
devs
free
who
to
want.
use for open repositories. If you have private repositories, of course you have to pay, but there's a free tier, like you have 3 minutes per month. So
Mhm.
it's not really like you're not barred from using it, even for private repositories. Definitely, there's a free tier you
Mm-hmm.
can maximize first.
It's nice.
That's
It's
cool.
nice.
That's
So
cool.
everyone, you can actually try it out. It's very good.
Try. Yeah, try it out. And if you have any questions, just contact this is Zenon here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for our next speaker, we have Joshua, and here he is. Hello.
Hey.
You're nothing.
Hello.
You
You're
Let me
shy.
sh- let me
shy.
sh- let me share my screen first.
Your internet's gonna hold up, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I think I can share my cam, but yeah, let's try. I can select start cam. Yeah, great. Hey guys. Okay,
Hi.
so we're
All
still
right.
here. Okay, I guess I can start. Or do you have? Okay, let me
Go for
just
it.
try to. Uh, Thanks. Great. Yeah, let me just try to see. Okay, hopefully you guys are still awake. Like this is the last talk for the night, and we still have a follow-up panel discussion after this one. So hopefully, you guys learned a lot, from the first three speakers and their presentations. And in this talk, this is probably, the talk that we haven't had, at least here in our community, and it's something that not a lot of us talk, especially in our Discord in our community. So hopefully you guys just for you guys, this is the first time you're hearing it. If you probably heard some of the tips that I've added here, then this will be a good refresher for you guys. Okay. Okay. So a lot of us, like probably mentioned by Sir Johnny earlier, think security as one of the last things that we would probably have to consider in our app, especially that we currently we're focused on building features. We are focused on building, like the UIs, the front end, and integrating APIs. But talking about security is something not a lot of us, shared interest to. So with this talk, all of us here now are working from home, and there's been an increase in terms of the number of users in mobile, especially for Netflix. They had to reduce the quality that they provide us in terms of especially here in the Philippines, most of you, or at least a lot of us, have been using Netflix or Apple TV, similar services while we work at home, and a lot of us as well, participate in the monthly promo. Hopefully not all of you are victims, but most of us participates in shopping promos online, either in Lazada or Shopee, and we're using, if not all of the times, we're using most of the time our mobile phones to shop for products online. And last but not least, and getting on a serious note, is a lot of us have been using mobile phones to use for online banking, since a lot of us can't go to the physical banks. We have to stay at home. We have to register for an account online because we can't meet physically, at least before. Right now there has been some restrictions, but again, there's been some increase in terms of the usage for mobile banking. And if you try to think of it getting serious note, except reducing the number of memes that we have, at least 79% of the smartphone users in the US have used their device for online purchases in the last 6 months. 86.5% of Americans use apps for mobile. And here in the Philippines, Gcash posted a 900% growth on a save money feature. And we can all talk about numbers here. We can talk about the growth, but one fact is, no, that will never go away here, is that a lot of us will be, or at least right now, currently dependent or on our mobile devices for the things that we do on our day-to-day, day-to-day work, day-to-day life with our family. And us developers, as Flutter developer, or even if you're the project manager, we have a shared responsibility of taking security seriously. Seriously, right now, we should not, take this into consideration if we already, release our apps, because that's going to be chaos. And we have shared responsibility, but not that big, because the first one is our shared responsibility is to protect the user data, especially for PII, so or personal identifiable information. So these are tax identification number, SSN for us, SSS, and birth dates. And our shared responsibility as developer or project managers to ensure that our app delivers or protects the user's data if it's already rolled out to production, or if it's already used by thousands of users. Other thing, if now this is specific to my use case, I'm working for a banking app or at least a fintech company. One of the things that we should consider protecting is their financial information. So again, the users are, for example, using Shopee, you are using a lot of e-commerce application, a lot of banking application, a lot of social media application, and these informations are all stored on the device of the user. So if you try to think of it, you have to find a way to ensure that these data that you save on the device are securely isolated or encrypted. So later we'll discuss the tips and details. And the last thing what we have to consider is to build trust with our customers. Otherwise, we won't have, like, they're the roots of our business. If we don't have them, then yeah, our business will, like, we will lose a couple of users. And the disclaimer for this talk is that the tips that I'll be sharing you, there are 10. Hopefully we can go over them and before the panel discussion. But the disclaimer here is that it will not help you secure your apps 100%. As a banking companies, we do pen testing. Even if we try to achieve 100%, it's likely impossible at the moment because there are a lot of devices. There are a lot of things to consider, like the network. Where are they connected? Are they connected to a public Wi-Fi? Are they connected to a secured network? Are they using VPN? So there are a lot of factors. But again, your aim is not to get 100% security. Your aim is to get at least like a reasonable or a good amount of security for the data and for security exploit in your app. Your goal here, if you try to think about it, if it's not 100%, your goal is to reduce or minimize the risk for any security exploit or exposure of the data. So meaning, are you allowing your app to run on a jailbroken device? Are you allowing your app to run on a rooted device? So those are the things that you have to consider, because if you have prevented it from happening, you have mitigated a lot of risks. Like a lot of risks that this if you allow your apps to run on these devices that is not supported by first party support by companies like Apple or Google. And next thing if takeaway that we have to get is to get a better sense on how insecure your app now. So if your app is secure now, like, that's a good thing. Like, I will not probably the tips that I'll be showing you will be a refresher, but again, if your app is insecure at the moment, then I recommend you follow along with the tips that we have. Okay, so the best, or at least the simplest and one of the best ways to make your app secure is to ensure that your Flutter SDKs are up to date. So right now the latest is 2.03, but if you can't migrate due to the nullability, I think 1.22 is still a good thing. If you have any specific issues for the vulnerability or want security patches, you can file an issue if this is pressing concern on your end. But I recommend to keep your Flutter SDK up to date because it has security patches. It has releases for any security vulnerabilities that are either found during testing or reported to the Google Flutter team. And also this applies as well to the packages and to the plugins that you're using. So you have to ensure that these are all up to date. Okay. Next one is obfuscate code. So the first thing that you have to think about obfuscate code is the meaning of obfuscation. So what is obfuscation? Well, it's a process or it's a practice of making things or making something difficult to understand. So, for example, if we have this specific code, like a class name called calculate payroll. By the way, this is not on Dart code, but you get the point. This is a class name, and this is parameters, set of while loop, the logic, and set of methods that is called in the specific code block or specific while loop. The process of obfuscation is best understood if you see the output. So the output here is on the right side of your screen, and you can see that even if the best developers or even the contributors on your open source project or an unwanted hacker may have difficulties on reading what does A represent, what does B represent, what does A represent. So there are a lot of things that have already been mitigated. First thing is with obfuscating code, you minimize the risk of exposing the logic of your code to any unwanted attackers or any unwanted or motivated attackers for your code. Next one as well, if you have API keys, like we can, there's no 100% way that we can put every API keys on the server side. So there are some services that will be using API keys, and you have to add it on your code. And this is an example of it. So for example, this is an API key. This will be the equivalent string value of that specific API key. So imagine if you are the attacker, then you'll have a hard time reading this symbols and series of characters. Or if you have tools, like you can always and parse it. So these are just some snippets. So some of you may, you don't have to run it, but at least what I want to emphasize on this one is Dart supports code obfuscation out of the box by using this parameter that obfuscates. So this is for SDK using 1.16 and above. If you try to run this app, it will obfuscate your Dart code in terms of like the method names, the classes, and you can do this for Android. You can also do it for the APK version for the Android. And this is the native specific setup. So for Android, like for at least for the Dart obfuscation, like this only applies for Dart code level. You may also want to add some sort of obfuscation on the native level. Although, like, to be honest, like most of us in the Flutter space, like most of these will be already be compiled from Dart to the native code. But it's a good thing as well that we can still do it for the API keys that we have for our app. So at least for Android, we use ProGuard, and we have these two files where we specify the rules. So for example, for the ProGuard rules, this is what we would eventually add, or at least initially add, like just to keep the classes that we have here. And just a few notes on ProGuard. So ProGuard does not only obfuscate your code, meaning it does not only help on securing your app, it also helps on shrinking the size of your the output of your code. So meaning, like, if you are Android, if you're in Android, like you'll save a lot of in terms of like the space for the user's device. You'll the size that we'll be seeing on the Google Play Store will be reduced to the amount of the string size file that you have. Other thing that you have to consider for securing API keys is to limit access to certain services. So again, this is the third tip. So API keys, as if you're already if you are already integrating services to your existing apps, we use API keys for us to be able to authenticate or validate that we are actually that user who signs up for the API key. For the API key, like if you're using third-party service, it allows us to, or at least allows you to connect to their services. It allows you to do some crude operations on their APIs. And one thing that you can do is to limit access to certain services, at least in a context of Google APIs. So if you're using Google API, there's this way in the Google console for you to be able to restrict the API key to either Android, and you can add the package name and the SHA fingerprint for that. So meaning, like, if that app is identified as you and that's authentic, that the fingerprint matches, then that API will only be used for your app. So you can also do this for iOS. And the key thing here is securing API keys is to help you avoid, abuse for the services that you're using, because API keys are built, whether from usage perspective or based on the number of requests made from a device. But one thing that you have to consider as well is that obfuscation is not 100% secure, and some of the API keys will always be deobfuscated, meaning it can be read with the right tools by any motivated hacker. So one thing that you can do is to provide access level token. So instead of just providing, at least this is on the server side perspective, like if you are working with a backend, maybe you can work with specific access level token. So for example, if you are creating a payment, instead of using the API key that you use as a company to apply for an open banking API, you can use some sort of access level token, meaning that token is only generated for that purpose. So for example, money transfer, it will not be used for any other transactions in your app, and it has certain expiration dates. But again, this is probably some of you are new to Flutter, so this is something that you might consider as well in the future, but at least you know that this is actually doable in terms of like securing your API keys. Next one is, if it's possible, like this is probably not possible for all services, you can integrate all the APIs or all the services to the server side and expose, like the services via REST. But again, now this probably works for a really, really specific use case of the app, meaning instead of calling the API keys or saving the API keys on the front end, you will move all the responsibility on the back end to store it in their our Secrets Manager or Google Secrets Manager. Oops. Okay. Last, for the securing API keys is that, like, do not track API keys on the repository. This is especially important if you are if you are trying to, for example, doing an open source project. You don't want to save API keys on the repository itself or the code itself, because other people will see your API key and will abuse the service. And again, if you're still not convinced, you can decrypt API keys on demand. Although this has some caveat, like this involves an extra process for to be able to make requests on each services that you use. But again, if only needed on the specific use case. For the development, like for securing API keys during development, like I would advise not saving it on the repository, but using configuration files. So for configuration files, we can use like .env, flutter.env. You can create a .env file, and you can, with the .env file, you can load it. For example, this is the Dart code. This is the URL of your repository or your project. Then you can load it inside your main.dart file. Although one thing that you have to think about this is not this is not used for you to be able to move away from storing API keys on the compile code. Like this one, like the values and the environment files, if you try to compile the code, they will still be there, but at least during development, or at least when you're trying to do open source projects, the environment files or the configuration files is only given to those who has like the right access, the right permission. And sharing this access can be done either through LastPass or similar password manager. One thing that I've seen as well common in the Stack Overflow is that using Firebase config for securing API keys. Well, at least right now, I recommend not using it. And also, Google do not recommend using Firebase remote config for any sensitive data. So Firebase remote config, if you guys are not aware of it, it's kind of like a way for you to be able to publish or publish toggles or values to your Flutter app with Firebase remote config plugin, and you can pretty much do some A/B testing. You can hide or remove specific function or feature on demand by just publishing. Like for example, add parameter, and there's a publish button here. And one of the few things I've seen in Stack Overflow is using Firebase remote config for API. So that's not recommended, especially that this parameters on the Firebase console can be accessed by anyone who has pretty much an access to the Firebase console. So, and also this can be exposed as well. This can be exposed. So it's pretty much, I would say, useless if you try to do that. Next is for the plugins. So I think we still have a couple minutes. So for the plugins, one of the few things that we discussed earlier is to keep it up to date. But one thing that I want to emphasize here is to beware of permissions that are unnecessary for a plugin to use. So for example, if you are adding a network specific or network only package, you would have to ask yourself, why is this asking me for a device storage or permission storage, right? So you would have to check on that one. Like, I mean, like if it's not needed, do not try to don't try to add the permission, because otherwise an unwanted attacker might try to do something on the behalf of the user. Next is one of the most important things is to secure user data. So one thing that we discussed earlier is to protect personal identifiable information, or PII, such as SSN or social security number, and other information that is relevant to the user that is using your app. Okay. So for PIIs or these kind of sensitive data, I recommend using Flutter Secure Storage. So under the hood, this Flutter Secure Storage is using Key Store, at least for Android, and keychains for iOS. So the two are, we consider, we, at least the community, considered as the standard for securing sensitive data for both the platforms. So there are multi-level layers of security there, and you don't want to implement everything from scratch, because this is there's a first party support for those two. So for sensitive data, especially for a small set of data, you use Flutter Secure Storage. Okay. But there are cases, that you have to cache entire lists of data. So for example, on our end, we're a banking app, we're caching transactions, so that if the user goes offline, we can still show the certain transactions that have been fetched earlier before he got disconnected or something. One thing that you can use is Hive database. So, like there are also similar database, but as I review it, like Hive, has a AES 256 encryption out of the box, and it works well with Flutter Secure Storage if you want to generate the encryption key, decryption key that you can use to secure the data of your users. So with caching as well, like not all the data that you want to store is key value pair. So there are times that you have to store data like like complex data like JSON or objects. I recommend using Hive for that one, since it has some performance improvements. Okay, so at least for the data, the goal here, even if we have a couple of options here, that some of them might not apply to you, but if it applies to you, the goal here is to encrypt the data and not store it in plain text. So whatever the tips that you followed for securing the data, the goal here is one thing, is to just encrypt the data and not store it in plain text. Some couple tips for follow-ups, like for integrating local auth, you may want to limit session activities. For example, if your app had been in the background, you can add 5-minute session activity, and after that you can ask for the face ID or the biometrics. Oops, I think ignore the image for this one. So at least for biometrics and fingerprint, I think this is very straightforward for everyone. Like this is part of the device. This is something that might not be applicable to all apps, but something that you would have to consider if you would like to secure apps, especially for banking apps. Next is a secure window. So this one has a caveat. Although it secures the window, for example, like if it's in the background, it will show a black color for your app. It's like what Spotify does, but it also blocks the access for screenshot. So the caveat there is if the user tries to do some screenshots, for example, like there's an error, you want to send a screenshot to the support, you may have to find a way for you to be able to allow the user on certain restrictions. Otherwise, you'll have hard time getting screenshots or getting feedback, especially getting feedback for the UI, how it works on the user's end. But at least with this one, it prevents any unwanted attacker from accessing sensitive information like credit card if the app is on background or is in background. This is an example snippet for iOS, but I don't think you have to memorize it. But yeah, this is just a method for native iOS Swift, and everything is animated. Again, last two tips: CI/CD. And I think a lot of us, at least most of us here, have talked about CI/CD. But how can we secure CI/CD? Like we've talked about it on the DevOps for Sir Paolo and for Zennon for the CI/CD talk. How can we secure our infrastructure? So, like we've talked about development, we've talked about the deployment builds, about how to secure them. On deploying your apps using a CI/CD infrastructure, you either have to consider whether you are going for self-hosted or a third party. So at least for self-hosted, like from my experience, you have to have a dedicated DevOps guy for that one, since it includes maintenance, it includes a lot of updates for the packages that you will be integrating for your CI/CD infrastructure. And next is uh, opting to use third party like GitHub Actions. With that one, like it removes the responsibility for you to secure the CI/CD infrastructure of your app. One thing that you can do if you're using GitHub Actions or similar self-hosted services is always keep your OS or VMs up to date. Like that's really one of the best things that you can do to ensure that the fixes for any vulnerabilities have been applied. Next is I recommend really focusing on having environment or env file configuration files rather than committing the code in the repository, because even if GitHub Actions is trustworthy, you can't blame yourself for not trusting any external entity having access to the API keys that you have. And one thing that like we have to consider why environment configuration files is important is that an alternative for this one is using secrets. So using secrets in GitHub Actions is easy. You can just simply go to settings. We have the secret sections here, and you can add the some secrets on this repository. And pretty much these can be fetched during compile time or during the time that your workflow is running on GitHub. So the cool thing here is you don't have to expose it to all the members of your team. Just have to keep it somehow restricted with people who have the responsibility to maintain the project. Last but not least, hopefully, yeah, we've go over for over 2 minutes now. But last but not least, this is not Flutter related, but this is somehow an organizational, no, thing to do. So, for example, every time like your team member, especially if you're in a big company or a medium-sized company, you can create some sort of access board, and you can track each request made. So, for example, Anton is asking for an Apple App Store access or Google Play App Store access. Then I can create, give access to him, and it's all tracked on a specific board, whether it's on a GitHub or whether it's on a Jira. Hopefully, none of you are using. But yeah, like you can track it using a board. Next is password manager. Again, like you don't want to share uh, passwords over Slack channel in plain text, even if it's encrypted. I think it would be better if it's in GPG encrypted. But a password manager is a lot easier, especially for non-technical folks who needs access to specific things, like, for example, customer-related data. In summary, our goal here, is I think I had to talk, I had to talk fast, but we can go back on tips that we have. I also have written it in a blog. But the goal here is not just to memorize or not just to apply these tips, but to have like the mindset, like the right mindset that it creates as a developer and as a project manager. How can we do better in terms of like security? Like we should think as if we are the users of our app. If we try to dogfood it, what can be used by an external attacker or an unwanted hacker to destroy my banking, destroy my personal life. Those are the things you have to consider. Some of the resources I've created an article for this one, so you can dive into some of the things that I haven't included here. And for our Flutter security, like one of the tips there is to really just keep your Flutter SDK up to date, but feel free to report any vulnerabilities if you found any. Okay, I guess I think I can add you guys here. I'll just have to ask your consent. Okay. Great. Okay.
Hi, Joshua. Great talk. Yeah, it's important to have an app that is not insecure.
Yeah.
All
Like,
right.
Where does it sound?
okay.
That's a word
Sounds
fun, right?
sounds something different. But okay, where's your screen, Z? Like I can see it. Oh,
Okay.
nice.
Alrighty.
So,
There you
hello
go.
everyone. So, we will be starting our panel discussion now. So, if you would like to ask additional questions, you may use this QR code on your phone, or you could just type in the URL flutterph/ask, and we can start. I think we can already start with our Q&A since there are already a lot of questions here. So, Sir Johnny,
Yep,
if you
yep.
could share your screen for the questions. Let's go.
Let me share my screen. And can you see it now?
Wait a bit. Josh, can you? There you go.
All right. Yep. Cool. So I guess the first one is Ronald Barian, if I pronounce it right. So how do we test Flutter apps in terms of VAPT, vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, and performance and load test? Thank you. I guess this is for everyone. I guess.
I think there are a lot of things included here, but yeah, I can only speak for pen testing. So we have two options. So there are a lot of open source pen testing tools out there, but one thing that we considered, since it's required by the banking partner that we have, is to really find a vendor that can provide a specific service that you need, especially for legal compliance. So it really varies depending on your partner or your banking needs, depending on who's asking for this kind of assessment. Yeah.
Cool, cool, cool. So
Sorry,
the
can I
next.
just add to
Oh,
that?
sure, sure.
Yeah. So for perspective on VAPT, normally how VAPT companies or the vendors do it is they want to get your build artifacts. They don't want to see your they normally don't want to see your source code in Flutter. They
Mhm.
normally test your app using your build artifacts and the exported Xcode project and the Android project. From my experience, there's not too many VAPT tools yet for Dart and Flutter. That's why they use your exported Android and Xcode projects to actually run their VAPT on.
Excellent. Cool. So,
Can I add on this at least?
yep.
Since Sir Zennon actually mentioned. So as Sir Zennon mentioned that they use your generated build artifacts, quite a lot of the tools, if you're familiar with native iOS and Android, can actually also be applied to the generated packages from Flutter. So if you're familiar with Frida, um, a good resource, because honestly, security is such a huge topic. We could spend all week here and we'd never really finish it. So it's really a hard question to answer in detail. But if I had to answer, there is actually a guide on OWASP for mobile security as well. So there's a lot of good information there that you can check out for the mobile security testing guide. So it's as good a place to start as any. Then just base it on your own situation.
Excellent. Cool, cool, cool.
Oh, cool.
Alrighty.
Okay. For our
Um,
next question, this one is from an anonymous guy. So
mhm.
it says, how do you prioritize existing pull requests for bug fixes? So I think this one is directed to Sir Shihao.
Yep.
Yeah. So every week we go through. So we have a, what do you call it? A framework sync meeting. Basically, the core Flutter team gets into a meeting, and then we go over all the existing pull requests and assign them. So we
Mm.
usually try to be as what do you call it? Like as on top of everything as possible. But sometimes with a lot of like competing priorities, like some of the pull requests might like fall into the darkness for some of team members. So we apologize for that.
Okay.
Alrighty. I think the next one can be answered by Paolo. If we as a company, if we as a company switch to a cross-platform, does that mean we'll be saving on money on developers?
Okay,
It's a good question, huh?
it's a good question, but it's also quite loaded.
Mm,
My first impression on this actually is focus first on the problem domain that you're trying to solve.
mm,
As
mhm,
in, fit the tool to the problem, not the problem to the tool. As in, if you're trying to save money by going cross platform, but cross platform isn't exactly the best option for you to use, like who knows? Maybe your use case has very heavy computation that maybe requires you to dive deep down into maybe the C++, or you have large integrations with a specific iOS feature, then cross-platform may not be the best approach. So it's kind of an answer that's not an answer, but I really recommend that you fit that you first determine your problem and then fit the tool to that. But if you do say that based on all your criteria, you evaluated it, and then cross-platform, especially Flutter, is the choice for you. Yes, there is a high possibility that you might save money because you're building for multiple platforms with a single code base. It's one of the reasons why in Stratpoint we got into multi-platform because of that promise. But again, be very careful that you're not just pursuing reducing cost at the expense of building it right.
Good answer. Anyone else would like to add? All right.
All right. So I think this next question is for Sir Z and Sir Pao. So as one of the leading Flutter developers in our country, so PH, so are you confident with your current team in taking more and more clients? When I think this one is for working in Flutter projects.
Yeah, let me answer that first and tie it in with Paulo's earlier answer. Again, it will depend on the problem domain. So if your client is looking into developing an AR app, then Flutter might not be your best case or best tool for the job, right? In terms of taking in more and more clients, it will really depend on whether or not if you are a Flutter-based team and if Flutter will actually fit the bill in terms of your client's requirements.
I couldn't have actually answered it any better myself. So Sir Zennon actually covered everything. But in truth, really, if it's really a fit, it's determined as it, then of course, feel free to reach out to Sir Zennon or to me if ever it's required. But again,
Yeah.
please don't sacrifice building things right
Yeah.
for the sake of a new tech or to save cost.
Well, yeah, and just to put it out there, technically you can build it in Flutter, but the cost of, creating a plugin just to build, for example, going back to my earlier scenario, if you really want to build that AR function that's really core to the functionality as a plugin to Flutter, then you're just adding more cost to your client and might not even close the project with them.
That's a good answer.
Cool.
Such-
Yeah. Cool. So the next one, which CI/CD would you recommend for low budget projects? I think it's for Sir Zena.
I think so. I was looking into the other questions. Other people were. Well, the next question is regarding Bitrise and CodeMagic. Just weigh the benefits of using the free tiers of these CI services and have a look at what how often you need those CI/CD workflows to run, because most of them will charge you by the minute, and if you run those CI/CD workflows every minute or every single hour, then definitely you won't be able to maximize those free tiers. So for low cost budget projects, I'm also thinking that you have a small team anyway. So just run have a workflow within your team and just have someone run, or maybe your QA run those on behalf of a more costly CI/CD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
of
what
course.
I would recommend, especially for low budget projects.
Cool. All right. I guess we can skip the next one.
Yeah.
Basically, you mentioned that just select test it out and see it for yourself.
Sorry,
So Z, the next one,
let me
right?
just go to the Bitrise and CodeMagic.
All right.
I
Cool.
don't want you to skip it. Bitrise and CodeMagic, what is nice about them is they remove the legwork of creating those YAML code and just have a drag and drop feature of how you want your workflows to run. So that's the benefit of using Bitrise and CodeMagic. There's very minimal coding required as far as I know. But then again, they have more control over your workflow and your project, and there's less control at least on your end.
Yep.
Also,
Excellent.
like I would like to add one thing on Bitrise. Like if you're looking for a low cost budget, like Bitrise actually has charge you for the number of concurrencies. So basically, if like you have Mac OS builds and sometimes it goes over, at least for our case, it goes over 30 to 45 minutes, and it's a lot expensive, especially for GitHub Actions. I think you might want to consider as well Bitrise. So among them, GitHub Actions and CodeMagic, Bitrise is the only one that doesn't charge by the minute. So yeah, with its concurrency, like it's around $45, but you get unlimited builds for that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Another
Nice.
thing with Bitrise actually is that they have a free tier that you can use their full build platform, I think for 30 days. Then after that, you will have to be able to use at least 10 minutes. And if you refer, I'm not sure if their referral program is still ongoing. You can get an additional 5 minutes per referral up until six referrals, I think. Yeah, so
Mhm.
I've been using Bitrise for my personal projects for a while now. It's really good.
All right.
Okay, so for our next question, I think this one is very open ended, no? And it's probably been answered by Joshua already. So
Mhm.
it's how do your companies ensure security, since it seems to be a recurring topic? So maybe we can skip this, or do you guys want to add on what Joshua was
Mhm.
discussing earlier?
Yeah, I want to add to that actually. Sorry, I have a lot to say. In our private chat here with Joshua, I actually mentioned that CI/CD is actually a good way for you to shift left your security requirements. Instead of doing your VAPT when you have your build artifacts done, you might want to integrate some VAPT to your actual source code early on in your pipeline rather than wait for your deadline and see that VAPT doesn't pass. So you'd want to shift left in terms of how your company ensures security.
Cool. Excellent.
Cool.
Next question is also about CI/CD, GitHub Actions versus Code Magic.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with Code Magic, personally
All
speaking, but
right.
I'd have to revert back to my earlier answer for Bitrise Code Magic and GitHub Actions.
Mhm.
Cool.
As a person who have
All right.
used both, what I can say is that Code Magic is more drag and drop, type here, type there, while GitHub Actions is you have to
Mhm.
learn about the YAML. So if you're a beginner, I suggest you start with Bitrise and Code Magic. Then you can learn from there.
Cool. Cool.
Next one. So this is from Ronald Barium, if is that correct? So he says here, does the implementation of CI/CD pipelines applies also in GitLab? What I mean is creating the YAML files supply on GitLab. Thank you.
Mm.
Uh,
Okay, I guess that's for me. Shout out to my team who greeted me in the comments earlier. So, in our
Mhm.
company, we actually use GitLab. We don't use GitHub Actions. Uh, I use GitHub Actions because it's more popular with open source projects, and you can actually leverage it in your open source work. But definitely, a lot of companies, especially those who are enterprise focused, use GitHub or rather GitLab for the private repositories. And our company uses GitLab, and as Joshua mentioned earlier, you can either self-host your CI/CD or have GitLab or GitHub run your actions or your CI/CD. So what we do is we have our um, hosted CI/CD servers on Amazon, and we use the GitLab YAML file, but it doesn't translate to GitHub Actions. So what I mentioned to my team is to actually not think about GitLab when you are doing your GitHub Actions and vice versa, because you'll just get confused. I hope I answered that question.
Cool. Alrighty. The next one is from Anonymous. For the release of Flutter 2.0 that includes a big screen, how do you recommend architecturing and adaptive screen. I'm getting
I
tongue
think this
twisted.
best answered by Sir Shihao, no?
Yeah. There's actually a page on the Flutter website that talks about creating adaptive applications. But basically, you would make use of two classes. There's Layout Builder and Media Query. And I'm pretty sure I've seen some packages that kind of help with it, but they might be tailored to specific use cases, so use those with caution. I think the Flutter Gallery has a bunch of apps that are adaptive. So those could be interesting. What do you call it? Vignettes for you to look at to base the architecture off of as well.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Next one.
Okay. For the next one, it's from an anonymous person as well. So aside from JWT, what are the common security integration for securing API calls in Flutter?
Okay,
Joshua?
right. At least for this one, hmm, I think the question is kind of like can be separated into two. So JWT is actually a process of or actually like a practice of authenticating the users. But in terms of like securing API calls in general, we can have some sort of network level, at least on the application, network level security for that one. Like for example, SSL certificate pinning is one common. We can also limit the trusted networks. For example, like if we don't need access for the specific domains or websites, then we can limit that in, at least for iOS, in the info list traffic, not arbitrary. For iOS or for Android, we have this network security config. So I think at least that's one thing to look at, the network layer where the API calls.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. The next one, I think it's a bit off topic. I use RxDart for implementing the block pattern. Is there a reason why I should switch to Flutter block package? Well, I guess I can answer this one, if you don't mind. Well, basically, before Flutter block package has been introduced, I used to also do this using RxDart to implement the block pattern. I think it's good for you to do this at first, so you know how the block pattern works. But then again, if you're going to do lots of projects and you're going to implement this, I would suggest switching to Flutter Block because it eliminates most of the boilerplates for you. It also has now the qubit methods as well, the qubit concept as well, which makes it even easier to use Block as a state management package, state management solution. So I hope this answer your question. All right,
Okay.
next one.
So I think that answers the question. So anyone else want to add on to that? No. So for the next one, so we'll be answering a few more questions since we're already going over time. So
Mhm.
I think we'll be answering around five more questions. Yeah. So for the next question is I think this one is also for Sir Shihao. So how would you suggest a new contributor to contribute? Maybe the context of this is to the Flutter project.
Yeah. So I find that one of the easiest ways is you already have a Flutter project and you find a problem that you can't solve, and it's something you have to fix in the framework. That's usually the easiest way because you already have context about the widget or the part of the framework that might be giving you trouble. If you're thinking about contributing when you're not used to doing open source contributions, there's a tag in, at least for the Flutter project, I think it's called easy fix. And that can be misleading because sometimes something that might feel like an easy fix turns out not to be so easy. but
Mhm.
usually that's where we go, or we do contributions to code samples. So that just basically gives you a good idea of like how to do a code review cycle, what do code reviews look like, how does our CI/CD work with the Flutter Flutter repo. And then, once you start from there and you understand and familiarize yourself with Git and GitHub, then maybe you can start tackling more difficult problems.
A quick addition to Shihao's answer. If you're really new to contributing to open source repositories, go to opensourcefriday.com. It's a GitHub site, and there's a guide there on how you can contribute for the first time on open source repositories like Flutter.
Excellent. Cool. Yeah, I'll check. We'll make sure to check it out. Cool. So the next question is from Kian Allen, and he's asking, my backend requires three keys to connect: the API, the master, and the app ID. Is it safe enough that I directly declared it on the code? What are the other ways to hide these? I think it's for security.
I think this has been answered already by
Oh,
Sir Pao,
sorry.
Sir Z, and Sir Joshua earlier.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let's skip
Mhm.
that one. John Lester Necesito. In GitHub Actions, did you try to use flavor environment integration for building applications in different environments?
Quick answer, no, I have not. So I'm guessing you're talking about flavor, like Android flavors. So
Mhm.
if that's so, no, I have not. But if you're talking about environment specific configuration, then in your repository settings, you can actually now set your environment variables depending on
Mm.
the environment that you're deploying to. But as far as I know, it's only used for web-based applications, and specifically Flutter is not yet supported. I actually have another open source repository that I use in my workflows that leverages encryption on environment-based variables, depending whether or not you're deploying to your staging environment or your production environment. So have a look at my profile on GitHub if you want to learn more about that.
Okay,
Excellent.
cool. So for the next one, so aside from Flutter Test and Flutter Driver, I think what testing tools can you recommend? So this one is kind of out of scope, but yeah.
At least for the Flutter driver, there's already a new. I think most of us here are already aware that there's already a new package like called integration test. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like deprecates the driver somehow, and Flutter team recommends you to use the new one, which is the integration test. Other than that, like using Firebase Test Labs is actually really helpful. Identifying from a perspective, like we're not actually writing tests, but I think it gives you the perspective how your app works on different devices. So I think Firebase Test Labs is really a good one.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
So Sir Joni,
So how many questions do we still have left?
we
Two
have two
or three?
more.
All right. So the next one is from Anonymous. Would you run banking apps on a rooted device? What's your thoughts? What steps is best approach in securing the scenario?
And
Uh,
anyone answer
I will
this?
not. I will not. Yeah, we're not. Right now we're restricting it. Yeah, because the problem with a rooted app, or at least similar with now, if you try to run your app on these, the artifacts of your device of your apps on these devices, even if you obfuscated your code, like there will be tools, that will be easily integrated on these rooted device and can easily hack or reverse engineer um, your apps basically. And that's something that you can easily do on a an OS that is like that's not rooted or jailbroken. Yeah, so that's something you have to consider.
If I could add to that, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Um, my general go-to answer here is try to assume that everything on the end client device or the mobile device is insecure by default. Assume that if somebody steals your device and you're trying to store or implement any keys or sensitive information on that device, one way or another, they'll be able to get it. So as much as possible, move all really important information outside of the device if possible. Do it through APIs, do it through some sort of middleware. Really assume that since you don't control the device in the end user's hand, there will be ways eventually that they may be able to compromise.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, and I think it's just common sense not to use rooted device for your banking apps.
Yeah, but
It's like invite.
sometimes common sense
I
is
don't
not
know.
that common.
It's like inviting a burglar to your house. All right,
Well,
cool.
I can think of one exception though. If you are a
Mm,
security researcher and you are doing it for your job,
mm,
maybe it's an acceptable scenario
yep,
trying to reverse engineer. But if you're really building or otherwise, maybe.
that's true. That's true. Cool. So last question, right, Z? I'll let you pick the last one.
I won't pick. It's just the next question.
The next question. All right, because it
What
was
is
going up and down.
I know, right? I think the last one is for the companies hiring Flutter developers.
Yeah,
What do you
let's do
typically
that
look
one.
for when hiring a developer from junior to senior?
Where is that?
So this one is for Sir Pao and Sir Z. Last question. ThinkBit versus
Sir Paolo,
Stratpoint.
you wanna you wanna go ahead,
There
Paolo?
you go.
Okay, sure.
There you go.
I'll be completely frank here. What do you typically look for when hiring developers? One, we definitely want those who are curious and who love to experiment, because honestly, technology is about constant learning. So even if you say you're an expert now, in 2 years, a lot of the stuff you know is either outdated or you need to learn more. So
Mhm.
another, of course, I know this sounds so cliche, but uh, attitude towards learning, culture, communication is really a big thing, because um, I'll be completely honest. So, and I'm pretty sure some of you may have encountered this, that sometimes you might encounter some really brilliant developers out there, but they're not really that pleasant to work with. So overall productivity eventually goes down, and really that doesn't really help anybody. So what do we look for? In short, maturity, attitude, and a thirst for learning. Um, that's practically it in general. So I'll pass it off now to Sir Zennon on their side.
Thanks, Paolo. So for us at ThinkBit, same with Sir Paolo, but better.
Yeah,
Kidding.
nice.
so, kidding aside, so what we look for with our Flutter developers for ThinkBit, we actually don't, especially for Flutter, since it's really new. What we look for are, again, like what Paolo said earlier, are people who are looking to learn more, who's not necessarily really seasoned developers, but any developer who wants to learn more about Flutter, try to solve problems using Flutter, and just enjoy doing it. So if you really want to join our company, thinkbitsolutions.com, or yung kay Paulo's, chatpoint.com, I think.
Parang tago
Mm.
for yan eh.
Yeah,
Which
it's hard
one?
to
Support
find good
local.
developers,
So we support
TBH.
each other anyway.
Yes. So if I might add a little bit more, as in the development community, it's actually a pretty small world. So you'll eventually encounter others working with other companies. So
Mhm.
really, um, one choice is really, it's a definitely active community, especially in Flutter. Honestly, I've been in iOS, I've been in Android. Flutter is one of the more active in terms of the development. Trust me when I say that some of the older documentations and open source projects in Android were not as nice. So um, to be very clear, as in really keep that attitude of learning and you'll do great no matter where you are.
Excellent. All right. It's all
Excellent.
about the attitude.
Yeah,
Cool,
the
cool,
grit.
cool. Yeah, yeah.
So I
You're
think we
great.
have one bonus question, the last
Oh,
one.
all right. Which one is
So
that?
this one is for Sir Shihao. So what
All
does
right.
it feel to be able to work in the fastest growing technology in the world,
Oh,
Flutter?
yes, yes.
Oh wow, this one, it's really interesting and really exciting because you can tell like it's definitely hard to keep up with everything, but it's also a really exciting time to be part of the team, right? Because we get to experience that super growth within like a year or two. And I joined right as the team, well, whereas one when the team started growing, but also like when the Flutter's usage started growing. So it's really really cool to see like that transition from a bit pre 1.0 to now 2.0.
Cool.
Cool, cool. Another bonus question. Are you hiring? Anyways,
We actually are, by the way.
wink, wink.
That is a
I'll send you a DM. Anyways, so I guess that's all of the questions for tonight. And what's our next step? Z?
So
Yeah, I
for the
think
next one, we can go for the draw lots for the 30 days of Flutter. So before that, we would like to thank all of our speakers for coming. So thank you, Sir Shihao. Thank you, Sir Pao. Thank you, Sir Z. Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you, thank you.
I think there is one question from Shihao. Maybe we can answer it off here, like before they leave.
Mhm.
So the
All
question
right.
is, how Sir is used in the Philippines? Like, is it common for companies based in abroad or based in the Philippines? Like, how common is it used? Yeah,
Sir Paolo, case in point.
um, well, we'll try to simplify. It's a wow. This is actually harder to explain than I thought it would be. Uh, think of it as a general nomenclature for respect. Like, um, in fact, you'll often hear this almost anywhere. Like, you'll hear it when you're sometimes when you're hailing a cab. Sometimes you'll hear it even talking to almost anybody. It's basically more or less a polite way of regards. Anyway.
very cool. Thanks.
okay. Okay, thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully we can have you guys next time again for our future events.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye
guys.
bye.
Cool.
Thanks.
So
Thank you.
Bye.
we'll
See you all next time.
let's do the
So, Joshua, if you can share my screen, I think we can start
Okay,
with the draw lots.
sure. Like,
oh that's
yeah, yeah. I'm a bit. My internet's breaking down. Let me
Yeah, you're
check.
just smiling on our side.
Yeah, yeah. For some reason, yeah. Which screen? Like, Sir Johnny or Zonily?
Zonny,
Z's.
Zonny and John.
Oh,
Okay, so we're going to
Alright.
be doing our draw lots for the 30 days of Flutter participants. So, what's the price? It's a secret. We'll get back to you on that
Special
after some time.
swag.
Basta it's a special swag. So, pwede na ata tayo mag-Tagalog in this part. I think all of
Yeah.
our participants naman are Filipinos, I guess. So, we have, how many participants did we actually have? According to this, wait lang, let me look for the document. I think we have 59 participants. So, for that, we will
Oh,
have 5 winners. So, pwede na tayong magpaikot. Let's go.
Ikot.
So ito yon, we have ilan yung nailagay dito? 54 participants pala.
All right. Good luck, everyone.
Good luck. So we have 5 winners, ha. Let's go. Let's spin. Bakit di siya nag-spin? Kasi mali yung pinindot ko. Don't tagal. Uy, congrats the Code Player 23.
Code player. Nice. Congratulations. Lilista ko ba yan? Ano bang gagawin
Yeah,
ko?
thanks.
Okay.
We will be sending you emails once na ano na siya. So, hide choice. Remove ka na. Bye-bye.
Wait lang, Zia. May request si Sir Zennon. Let's just add him sa stream for the meantime. Sige. Or, okay. Okay. No. I think, yeah. Sir. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, no. Like, yeah. Continue. Yeah.
Okay, let's continue. So, for the next one, whee! Dapat may drum roll tayo. Nako, papanalo ba natin to?
Up to you.
Hindi. Ano yan? Skip. #donate.
Donate.
Sorry, Jan.
Sorry, Dian.
Next. We have...
Tapos susunod ikaw, ano?
Yun nga eh. Uy, so for the next
Jan
one,
din.
we have Jan Dran Rebalangyu. Ngue.
John Tran Red.
I'm sorry, hindi ko ma-pronounce.
Okay, let's
Okay,
acknowledge
yes.
yung ads. May ads tayo sa
So
HP.
we have Intel Core, HP Windows 10.
Okay, so mga walang Windows laptop, you can buy now from HP. Oh, no, wala na yung ads.
Ayun na.
Nagsiskip siya to Windows 10. So
Okay.
as Flutter developers, I highly advocate using MacBook.
Okay, let's
for the
proceed.
next one,
Next one.
third person. Grabe, ang tagal, no? Carl Jan Reginaldo.
John
Cool.
Special swag.
So, yeah, you will be receiving your special swag soon, pero not yet.
Swag.
We're still working on it.
Yeah. Swag.
Okay, don't forget to buy HP Windows 10
10.
laptop.
Sponsor.
Uy, whoever you are, Necessito Lester, you're lucky.
Oh, siya yung nagtanong kanina.
Oo nga.
Kung ano, it's nice.
Wow.
Cool. And
Scripted.
then,
It pays. It
scripted.
pays to participate. Ano?
This is definitely not scripted.
Yeah.
Lumabas
ano
nga si
yan,
Jan Salvador kanina. Pero
may
donate.
ads pa nga eh.
Swag.
HP Windows 10 laptop.
Uy, nako, donate.
Ay,
Donate.
donate
Ay,
pa yan,
wala.
donate.
Wala, umalis na yan eh. Donate. Umalis na siya. Kumain na siya.
So sa mga nanonood pa ngayon, so mga pinapadonate namin is mga fellow admins and moderators sa team namin sa Flutter PH.
Yep.
So yun, just a quick background. And for the last one, paikutin ulit natin ng wheel.
Swag.
HP Windows 10 laptop.
Uy, Tan M. Her 09. Thank you. So yeah, we have our 5 winners.
Okay.
So we will
Excellent.
announce this na lang sa Flutter. Thank you guys for watching.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you guys for hosting.
Bye-bye. It's the
Okay.
end of our subscribe. Don't forget to like,
Subscribe.
share, and subscribe.
Like,
And comment.
heart, favorite.
Comment.
You can
Notification
join
bell.
our community. Open the notification bell and the usual things. And this is your boys only.
Oh,
Your boy Joshua
Follow us on Twitter.
and your
ganun.
boy Joni. Lahat kami may J
Twitter
sa
mo.
pangalan.
Flat.
Oo nga.
Pag kayo ng Twitter nyo. Joke lang. Okay, sige. Okay, I think we will.
Yeah. Thanks guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'll
Bye.
end the stream.